We're talking about the Sermon on the Mount. These revolutionary kingdom declarations. I've alerted Cece not to call me during class. Hopefully that will stick. We'll see. So we ended last class talking about these things and me getting all flustered about my phone call. And Kent reminding us that what a masterful job Jesus was doing here on the Sermon on the Mount of understanding his audience and welcoming the people into this coming kingdom of heaven. What a glorious introduction Jesus has to the opening of the kingdom of heaven here in the Sermon on the Mount, and specifically here in the Beatitudes. So we're going to begin our progress through the Beatitudes as we go through, and maybe we'll even get to the metaphors just by way of reminder of where we were last week. Just kind of reviewing, we did some vocabulary last week talking about this idea of what the word blessed means, and that comes from that Greek word makarios, and this is an observation word. This is, you might imagine, a couple of people walking down the road, and one is making the observation to the other person who's walking beside him, saying, that's somebody who has life figured out. They are flourishing. They are fortunate. They are happy because of the choices that they've made in their life largely. But it's a matter of circumstance that they are in this position, and that is that word makarios, or translated into English, blessed. And this idea of a macarism is these pithy statements of pronouncing these blessings, so to speak, that we find Jesus doing in this case. Jesus, of course, was not the only one to do that. We also looked at the Latin word for blessing, which is beatus, where we find the foundation for the word beatitudes. And we find that in Hebrew, it is that word ashrei that is familiar in the wisdom literature, especially in Psalms and Proverbs. And again, demonstrating that this is an observation. This is not Jesus pronouncing a blessing. This is the same as the psalmist who is saying, I'm identifying this person who is thriving in life. He's like a tree planted by streams of water who is flourishing and who is fruitful in every season. And so Jesus is making those same types of observations, but it sounds completely different. We talked about the English difficulties. The translation of this word into English kind of draws our minds to this idea of, like we use the word today, I'm so blessed. I have been blessed. Have a blessed day. And what we mean by that is that God has given me blessings. And today when I say God bless you, what am I saying? I'm saying I'm pronouncing the blessings of God upon you. But that's not what Jesus is doing in the Sermon on the Mount. He is identifying the people who are thriving and flourishing in life. And so that's a completely different feel, and it makes it read completely differently. And it is even more striking and more confusing, maybe, even to the people who are hearing these things. Because they've heard macarisms all their lives from people like Ben Sira, who had his Beatitudes that we talked about last week. And even the Qumran community had their Beatitudes. So this was a familiar way of teaching. These were the way, one of the the methods that the rabbis used during this time. So when Jesus begins the Sermon on the Mount with blessed are these people and blessed are these people, that's familiar. But what's not familiar is the kind of groups that Jesus is pointing to and saying, well, these are the thriving ones. These are the flourishing ones. These are the happy ones. Because he's talking about those who are poor in spirit. He's talking about the people who are mourning. He's talking about the people who are meek and powerless. And he's making the observation, here are the fortunate ones. And you can imagine the audience that Jesus is speaking to, not only as we've described them as the outcast, as the disenfranchised, but also the elites of society. Hearing Jesus say these words, they're saying, there's no way. It's evidence that God is blessing people who are thriving financially and in their health and in their life circumstance. Those are the fortunate ones. Those are the flourishing ones. Those are the fortunate. And Jesus said, no. So in these first three, and so that's what we're going to do today. We're going to keep these within their triads as we have begun our study here. We're going to look at those first three Beatitudes, and then the second three, and then the third three. And I want you to think about those in their units like that, because I think that helps us understand the structure. Now, I might say something else about structure. It's interesting to me that Jesus has these 9 blessings, macarisms, to describe people who are flourishing in life, who have figured out how to live in humanity in such a way that they have figured it out. And then you go over to that 5th teaching block that we talked about in Matthew, the 23rd chapter, and we find Jesus pronouncing 8 woes. And so what we have here is a bookend of teachings. We have the blessed are, and then we have the woe unto you scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. And the point that he's making with these 2 bookends, and all of this material in between, is that here are the thriving ones, and these are the ones who look like they're thriving, but they're not. Here are the ones who are poor, but thriving. Here are the ones who are rich, because the Pharisees, the scribes, these were the elites. They were rich. They looked at their wealth. They pointed to their wealth as evidence that God was with them. And Jesus is saying that woe unto you, that's the anti-Macarism, right? That is, you are leading a life that leads to non-flourishing. And so this is an interesting contrast in the structure of Matthew, I believe intentionally done by Jesus, to put the blessings in chapter 5, the woes in chapter 23, bookending the entire gospel. And if you think about how the other authors have dealt with this information of Jesus, you might look at Luke 6. Luke doesn't put it in that order. He doesn't use that bookend method. In Luke 6, verse 20, this is Luke's account of some of the same information that Jesus is sharing. He turned his gaze on his disciples and began to say, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God." Okay, that sounds very familiar, doesn't it, from what we find Matthew recording for us. Verse 21, "Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you and ostracize you and cast insults at you and spurn your name as evil for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day and leap for joy, for behold, your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you're receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when men speak well of you, for in the same way their fathers used to treat the false prophets. So Luke doesn't use it in the bookend method like Matthew does. He puts it all together as in the same text to make that obvious contrast between the blessings and the woes. And I find that astonishing, that Matthew chose to do it like this. Again, appealing to that magnificent structure that Matthew chose to reveal these truths to us. All right? So, the first three. Blessed are the poor, blessed are those who mourn, and blessed are the gentle. This triad is the surprise announcement of Jesus saying, the kingdom of heaven is coming, and it is for these people. These are the first ones to be invited. This is turning everything on its head. This is completely unconventional. This is revolutionary in its thought, because Jesus is appealing to the people who have been rejected in society, who are poor in spirit, which means exactly that. They are poor, they are deficient in life. Their life force is poor. They're sick. They have all kinds of problems in their life. They have no money. They can't feed their families. And so they're struggling. What do you mean these are the flourishing, Jesus? And then those that mourn, the mourners are the ones who look at their life circumstances and they see this is not good. This world is not a friendly place. And so I am being oppressed, and I am struggling, and I am having all of these problems in my life, and I'm grieved over the situation of people oppressing other people, and the inequities of life, and the injustice in life is a source of grief to me. And the meek or the gentle here, don't translate that or in your mind as simply humble people. Jesus isn't talking about people who choose humility. He's talking about people who have no power. They're powerless. They have no influence in their world. These are people who are unimportant in every way, dismissed in their society. And so Jesus, walking down the street with his buddy, says, these are the flourishing ones. So you tell me, how can that be? Is it as confusing to you as it is to me? As it was to this generation? For Jesus to say, the flourishing ones are those people. There's something about those people. There's something about those people, Steve. You've got something. Say it.
I was just going to say that it becomes even more confusing to them when they hear, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the Pharisees. So they're like, wait a second, you've told us that we're good for being down here, but you're telling us we ought to be up here. How do we do both?
Yeah. So this is not a commentary on righteousness. We're going to get to that in some of the other Beatitudes. But he's just talking about life circumstances. These are struggling individuals. Yes, Jan?
One thing, when you are poor and mourning and gentle, meek, when you hear and see truth, and when you are offered truth and life and hope and unbelievable grace, you understand your need for it desperately, and you also have been humbled by all of your circumstances, so it's easier to you are humble.
There's
so
no-
you
there-
receive it.
There's no self-reliance, right? There's no
Yeah.
independence. There's no strength
I can
in
do it by
my
myself. Yeah.
own strength. So this is the group of people who have come to hear Jesus. They are magnetically drawn to Jesus with a wild hope, because I use that word hope wrong. They're looking for anything. Maybe this guy is the one who can give me some hope. Turns out, yeah, you hit the jackpot with this guy. But these are the ones who are magnetically drawn because they have no assurance that things are going to go well in their life. They're looking for something, and they don't have it. And so these are the ones who crave what Jesus is offering. They're craving a new order. Think about this. The kingdom of what? The kingdom of heaven is coming to earth. And it doesn't look like the other kingdoms, because who's thriving in the other kingdoms? The wealthy, the powerful, the influential. But in this kingdom, who's thriving? Just the regular old Joes who come to Jesus understanding that they're empty and ready to be filled by him. That's earth-shattering for these people who are hearing this. And it's aggravating for the Pharisees who hear this, right? Don't ever let that leave your mind, that as we go through the Sermon on the Mount, the secondary audience, sometimes the primary audience, is the Pharisees and the hypocrites. They are hearing these words as well. And they're going to be responding to these things. And so this is something. Anything else about the first triad you'd like to say? Yeah, here.
I think a recent way to understand, to feel what the gentle is, it's a force general. Like the Hamas hostages, they can't talk. They can't get out of the chair. They cannot request food. These people are captive. They're captive of the Pharisees. They're captive of the Roman Empire. They are totally captive. They're victims. And Jesus is saying, I'm going to make you victorious.
Yeah. So sometimes it's easier to think of defining these words by their opposites. The opposite of gentle or meek here is mighty. Somebody who is mighty, somebody who is powerful, strong. That's the opposite of the one who is gentle or meek here. There's another hand up.
I think they also have no link to this world, right? Jesus realizes his audience, that they are hungering for what's next.
Yeah.
And those of us in this group, who are entitled and already have positions, not going to be quite as willing to hear.
Yeah, I've got life figured out on my terms, in terms of being successful, navigating this world, and those are the ones who don't feel that strong appeal to this new kingdom. Everything's good with you in your life. It's harder for you to come to that. Get this.
And if you have these, you're not far from the kingdom. If you have all these things people think are, you have wealth, you have power, you see how Jesus deals with those guys, and it's baggage for them to get rid of to come to the kingdom. So it's harder when you have power and when you have wealth,
Yeah.
etc.
Absolutely. All right, second triad. The second triad has a different feel altogether. And now we move into this section where these are the type of people who, in many ways, feel most at home with these ethical, revolutionary ideas that Jesus is bringing out. All right? So, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And blessed are those who are pure in heart, for they shall see God. So in this second section, we still have a sense of discomfort in the lives of these people when it says they hunger and they're thirsty. They're not satisfied with the way things are in the world. They're looking for something else. They're pursuing something else. So there is this level of discomfort. And I've got to tell you, every time I read the Sermon on the Mount, I get a little bit uncomfortable. I've got to tell you. It's not meant to give you warm fuzzies when you read the Sermon on the Mount. It is meant to challenge you. And it does that. And in many ways, it humbles. I'll say humiliates me. It humiliates me when I read. And I have to think that the people who were amazed at these teachings, like I'm amazed at them, were in that same position. And they might have been thinking, like Steve said, who can rise to this level of the Pharisees and scribes and their righteousness? I mean, these are the superheroes of righteousness in their minds. And so it's some very intimidating things that Jesus is bringing. So there's this level of discomfort. But the ones who are most at home at this concept of the kingdom of heaven are the ones who have an ethic already within them. They're hungry. They're thirsty for righteousness. What is righteousness? Very simply, I think we defined righteousness as doing the right things. And that's a good starting point to understand what righteousness is. It's going to become clear as we proceed through the Sermon on the Mount that righteousness is more than just doing right things. It is about relationships. It's about relationships that we have with God and relationships that we have with men. After all, Jesus is going to make that statement, right? Upon these two commandments, hang the whole law and the prophets, love God and love man. And so that's what righteousness is. It's being in a relationship with God where everything is right, and being in relationship with your fellow man where everything is right. And that's a tall order, isn't it? That's an intimidating thought to define righteousness in that way. And there's also a sense of, I'm going to say it, social justice associated with righteousness. To be able to look at the circumstances of this world and have compassion for those who are suffering injustice. It happens all the time. And the prophets of old spoke about the injustices all the time. Jesus had those things firmly, indelibly printed in his heart because he knew the prophets so well, as we will see. Hopefully we'll see. I've got some notes here in front of me. But this is a theme that is ages old. You defend the defenseless. You speak out for the widow and the orphan and the foreigner. You are upset with the social circumstances of life that include injustices to your fellow man. When you're hungering and thirsting for righteousness, you're looking for a better situation, a better kingdom, a kingdom of heaven, where heaven meets earth. And that's what Jesus is introducing now. And the ones that hunger and thirst for it are ready. These are the ones who are ready for it. And the ones who are merciful. Merciful. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Mercy, in my opinion, raises the bar. It's one thing to be a good neighbor and to do right things and to be nice, but to go beyond being nice and kind and considerate is to extend mercy. Because mercy is a real ethical demand that, as I said, raises the bar to forgiveness. Offering forgiveness not just to my friends and neighbors, but to my enemies. Blessed are the merciful. Jesus will go on to say, who are the ones God's going to forgive? The ones who demonstrate forgiveness themselves. And so the ethical standards are rising as we proceed through these Beatitudes. Blessed are the pure in heart. Basically, this is a quote from Psalm 24. Let's read that. Jesus so often quotes or references the Psalms. And he says this in Psalm 24, verse 3, who may ascend into the hill of the Lord, and who may stand in his holy place? He who has clean hands and a pure heart, who has not lifted up his soul to falsehood, and has not sworn deceitfully. So again, Jesus is raising the bar for the ones who will see God, just like he says in Psalms here. Those who are pure in heart. Somebody who's pure in heart is somebody who he doesn't just do the right things, but he does the right things from the right motive. Oh, come on, Jesus, you can't have it all, right? Let me just get away with doing the right thing, even if I still hold some bitterness in my heart. Right. This is a real challenge. To have a pure heart while we're doing the right things, to do things from the right motives. Again, you can see why this is the introduction. We're going to talk about the Pharisees doing the right things, but having the wrong motive in their heart. And having hypocrisy there. And having bitterness and arrogance there. And so raising the bar of these great ethical standards is the intent of Jesus here. And as Steve pointed out, that Gerald made the remark, maybe these are the entrance requirements for the kingdom of heaven citizens. Jesus is really challenging us. Yes, Bobby?
Jesus is actually giving us a very strong suggestion to continually check our own motives.
Yeah, no doubt, and that will be a big theme that we will see throughout this. Speaking of themes, let me just kind of take a little bit of a detour here as we wrap up our second triad here. There are major themes throughout that we've talked about throughout the early part of Matthew, but even in the Beatitudes going forward through the rest of the Sermon on the Mount, there are some major themes. Kingdom of heaven certainly is one of them. It's mentioned twice here in the Beatitudes, the kingdom of heaven. Righteousness mentioned twice in verse 6 and then again in verse 10. Righteousness is a big deal, something we need to grasp and understand. Persecution, again, there's a very strong flavor of that in this third triad. This final beatitude adds this emphasis and really adds this climactic tone of what's going to happen with these people who are flourishing. They're going to suffer. They're going to suffer. They're going to be persecuted. But they're in good company because they have the prophets who are going to suffer. Mercy is another one of those big elements that we're going to find here, not only in the Beatitudes, but in the Sermon on the Mount. And it is this action of a generous spirit who's going to help others, forgive others, give alms to the poor. I wanted to go back again to reference another Old Testament prophet that Jesus is perhaps referencing here, and that is in Hosea, the 6th chapter and verse 6. We find Jesus quoting this text twice in the book of Matthew. In Hosea 6 and verse 6, this is where he says, "For I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Jesus is going to come to that concept more than once. In Matthew the 9th chapter, and then again in Matthew the 12th chapter, where he's being challenged by the Pharisees for what he's doing on the Sabbath day. God delights not in the sacrifice, or go and learn what this means. I desire mercy and not sacrifice. So those are some of the big themes that we find here. Now let's go on to that third triad, unless there are other things to say about that second triad. Yes, Gitsis.
Was it a big deal for him to say, "They shall see God"?
Yeah. I think it is. And like I said, I think that's a direct quote from Psalms. Psalms 24, where is that right? Yeah. Where, the pure in heart, they will see God. Who sees God? Well, we're told that nobody can see God and live.
Yeah.
So it's only the pure in heart who level up, so to speak. Who level up and have this ability to ultimately see God.
I just had a question with regards to that. Could it be, seeing how God is working in your life, not necessarily seeing God himself also?
Yeah, just to have a perspective of understanding who God is. Yeah, I think that's a great point. That we can see that God is working in this world, and he has a plan, and it's unfolding, and we're part of that plan, and we come to be like Jesus, and so we see God for who he is. That's a great point. All right, so this third triad then. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men cast insults at you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely on account of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward in heaven is great, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So this third triad. So it kind of builds on what the second triad was. So these people who are focused on hungering and thirsting for righteousness, these people who are focused on justice in this world and understanding the inequities of this world, need to be addressed by God's people. And so he says, blessed are the peacemakers. Peacemakers here are people who are willing to put themselves in the middle of the conflict. We still live in this world. And we are going to find ourselves in moments where we must be the advocate between two warring parties. Sometimes we are in the war ourselves. And we are required to be a peacemaker with somebody who wants to wage war against us. But I think larger than that is this idea of peacemakers in this world are following the example of Jesus, the epistle of Ephesians. He himself is our peace, who broke down the barrier of the dividing wall, who brought together Jew and Gentile. He was the peacemaker, the Prince of Peace. 5 minutes. No? No minutes?
Too short.
I tried. You have something?
No, go ahead.
Oh,
Finish up. You have 0 minutes.
I have 0 minutes. Sorry. I surrender, basically. But yeah, the peacemakers. God's people are willing to put themselves at risk for the sake of making peace in this world, overcoming the injustices. You see somebody being oppressed, you get in the middle of that. And that's a dangerous place to be. And that's his point. You're a son of God when you do that, but what follows? Persecution follows. Persecution follows. Slander follows. The world will not understand what you're doing. They will not appreciate what you're doing. They'll accuse you of all manner of terrible things. But that's who we are, because that's who Jesus was. All right. That's all I'm going to say about that today. Appreciate your good comments.